Back in 1987, armed Soviet troops were in Afghanistan. Many young men wishing to defend their homeland and test their strength voluntarily enlisted to be sent to hotspots, including the Premier Mountains. These brave and gallant young men were not afraid for their lives, and they dreamed of heroic deeds, but they did not know how their fate would turn out. Unfortunately, few of them returned home to their mothers. They ended up serving in a small unit of the Soviet troops, which dug trenches near the Pamirs to repel the army of Pashtuns, who were supposed to pass through this territory to reinforce the main forces that were actively fighting with the Soviet army on the border with Tajikistan and Afghanistan. The young people who were soldiers very abruptly had to forget what warmth and comfort were, and even what delicious food and a warm bed were. They had to live in terrible conditions, often slept on the hard ground, and ate what they could get their hands on. In addition, they did not know what might happen to them at any given moment. Bullets whistled over their heads every now and then in a hot spot. It was never known whether you would return from patrol alive, whether you would see your comrades, or whether you would be captured by the enemy. In such conditions, the psyche very quickly loses its stability. People are often tormented by insomnia and the inability to relax, as they should always be looking for an unforeseen attack. The hero of our story today quickly realized that it was better to work patrol at night than to try to sleep in the camp, because regardless, sleep did not come, so he replaced his colleagues at night, allowing his friends to sleep. Whiling away the long hours of waiting, he often watched the wildlife. There's a lot of life in Afghanistan, from poisonous scorpions to poisonous snakes. He was not afraid of them. On the contrary, he tried to get to know their habits and study their behavior. His squad was wary of his hobby. Usually, the soldiers tried to exterminate all the poisonous creatures in the area so that they wouldn't attack them, because it was already dangerous enough to be there already. But this man never offended reptiles, and he did not let his colleagues exterminate them in his presence. Once, sitting in a trench, he found a snake's nest nearby. There was a clutch of eggs in it, and the mother was not around. Then, something incredible happened. Right before his eyes, little snakes began to hatch from the eggs. He was fascinated by this sight because he had never seen the birth of snakes before. All the babies hatched from the eggs, and he felt some kind of connection with them. The little snakes did not crawl away, but remained in the nest. The young man fed his new pets each time he went on patrol to the same place. They turned out to be baby cobras. Now, although cobras are considered one of the most poisonous snakes on Earth, he was unafraid and continued caring for them. Now, of course, he took all precautions. He did not come close, and he tried not to provoke a possible attack from the dangerous snakes, but gradually, they began to get used to him. His colleagues warned him many times that such a situation could end very badly, and they tried to destroy the nest several times, but he urged them not to touch the baby snakes and leave them under his responsibility. Of course, in war, people sometimes behave strangely, and sometimes they have unique hobbies. Still, they should be treated with understanding, because to avoid going crazy from constant nervous tension, people need at least some kind of emotional release. Therefore, his comrades left the strange pets alone, and they only warned that if something happened, well, then they would have to destroy the nest. But to everyone's surprise, the snakes did not show much aggression towards people and calmly coexisted next to them. As time passed, whenever the man entered daytime patrol, he played with his snakes. He fed them and watched their behavior. At 8 o'clock one day, he was to be replaced by his companion. But one day, at the appointed hour, his colleague did not come to change shifts. He waited another half hour, wondering why no one had come. Then another half hour passed, and the guy decided to leave his post. He wanted to go to the camp to check out what had happened and why no one was coming to replace him. But then, one of the snakes, which he had nursed so carefully, tried to attack him from above. The cobra got into her fighting stance and hissed in warning in his direction. He was petrified. Previously, these snakes had never showed aggression and never tried to attack him. He tried to slowly crawl back and exit from a safe distance, but the snake caught up to him and resumed a fighting stance. He stood motionless. He did not know what to do. Call for help? Well, by that time it was already dark and there was no soul around, and he could hardly shout to the camp. He tried several times to crawl away from the snake, but every time he tried to get out of the trench, the cobra opened her hood and forced him to climb back down. So they stood opposite of each other all night. All of his attempts to leave his zone were unsuccessful. And only when the first rays of the sun appeared in the sky did the cobra loosen her stance, sink onto the sand, and slowly crawl away from her captive. The man quickly jumped out of the trench and rushed headlong into the camp. He had suspected that something was wrong because that night, no one came to replace him on patrol. Arriving at the camp, he saw a terrible sight. All of his colleagues were lifeless in different parts of their camp. It turned out that the night before, the Pashtuns quietly crept into the territory of their camp and exterminated all the young fighters. And now, he could not believe that he was the only one out of the whole squad who survived. He survived thanks to that cobra. He survived only because he once tamed that wild animal. Only then did he understand why the snake would not let him get out of the trench. She was warning him of the danger. She did her best to protect him. And only when the danger had passed and the Pashtuns left the camp at dawn did she crawl away, giving him the opportunity to get out. He was able to find the radio and call for reinforcements. When help arrived, for a long time they could not understand his explanations about the strange behavior of the cobra, which did not allow him to come to the camp. They even tried to accuse him of betrayal and treason, but they could not find proof, so he was simply discharged for lack of evidence. This story shows us that any living creature, even wild and poisonous, is able to show care and gratitude for kindness.